Hello, everyone. Thank you, Boulder Bookstore, for allowing me to speak about my book today. And here it is. It is called The Kennedys in the World, How Jack, Bobby, and Ted Remade America's Empire, just out from Potomac Books. And I'm delighted that you're giving me a few minutes to speak about it. This is a new story about the Kennedy brothers. We all know that they were raised to attain power. This is a story about how they were raised to attain a particular kind of power, to learn and care about the world beyond America's borders, and then once they had attained power, to shape America's place in the world, to change the world through that behavior. So this is a broader story, not just about the Kennedy brothers, but about the role that we've played around the world in the post-World War II period. I think the book is going to appeal to anyone who is interested in these three iconic brothers. It's going to appeal to anyone who's interested in American history in general. And I think it's going to appeal to anyone who's got a particular interest in American foreign policy. Now, as you may know, the Boulder Bookstore asks authors to answer a few questions and then to read a little from the book. So I'm going to do both, and I look forward to it. The first question is how I became interested in the Kennedys and their impact on the United States and the world. I've had a long fascination from my earliest days on Jack Kennedy, his intelligence, his passion, his dynamism for America's global role. He was the Cold Warrior par excellence, and he worried about whether America would survive the Cold War during very perilous times. Then I witnessed Bobby during the Vietnam era rethink his own Cold War approach and where it had gotten us, and his views evolved. And then, as a journalist, I had a front row seat to watching Ted wield enormous influence on America's global role. And I thought from that that there may be a book in all three of these brothers and in this particular aspect, why they cared so much about America's global role and what they did to shape it. Secondly, I was asked what kind of research I did. Well, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of pages of material. The papers of all three brothers, which are at the JFK Library, including letters, diaries, school papers, and other kinds of memorabilia. Hundreds and hundreds of oral history interviews by and about the brothers with people who served with them, under them, family members, friends, both at the JFK Library and the Edward Kennedy Institute, which is next door. Hundreds of speeches that the brothers gave, the many books and articles that the brothers wrote on the issue of foreign policy, White House records, congressional records, and then many thousands of newspaper and magazine articles of the time on each of the challenges that the brothers addressed from the late 1940s all the way through Ted's death in 2009. I was asked whether my experience working in the White House perhaps shaped my perspective, and I think it did. I was privileged enough to serve for 4.5 years in the Clinton White House as communications director, first at the Office of Management and Budget, and then for Vice President Gore. And I came to see, President Clinton, Vice President Gore, and other senior officials making decisions. And when you see the decision-making process up close with a front row seat, it gives you a perspective to judge how other presidents and senior officials made their decisions. So I think it gives this book a certain richness. I was asked what I learned during the course of writing this book that surprised me. I was surprised to learn more about the family, that they were not always the close-knit family that we've heard about, that there were great rivalries among the boys. And I was also surprised to learn so much about how gifted the three brothers were as writers. You probably don't know it, that each of them served as foreign correspondents at different times. Jack in 1945, Bobby in 1948, and Ted in 1956, and then again in 1961. On their travels, they would send dispatches back home to different newspapers. And they wrote with a remarkable richness about the history and the culture of the societies that they were visiting and what they were observing. And that comes out a lot in the book. I was asked, what is the most interesting thing that the Kennedy brothers did in their time in power that changed the world? Basically, that they changed America's approach to the world, in particular to what we know as the developing world. They shared a view that, unlike traditional American foreign policy, which was to support the governments that supported us, no matter how odious they may be, that we needed to build alliances to people on the ground, the people in Asia, Africa, Latin America, that were trying hard to build new societies, that were trying to topple these authoritarian governments and build free and democratic governments. And they pursued those policies all throughout the course of Jack's tenure in the Senate and then in the presidency, Bobby's work in the White House and then in the Senate, and through Ted's long Senate career. I was asked how I think the Kennedys would have responded to the current pandemic. And all I can tell you is much differently than we have over the course of the last year. I think first and foremost with a call for national unity, with a call for sacrifice, and with a call for coming together. I don't think their approach would have been like ours has been largely over the course of the last year. Every man, woman, and child for himself, every state, every city, every county. I think there would have been right from the start a real national effort, everyone pitching in, everyone making the sacrifices that we need to make. I was asked finally if there's anything else I want people to know about this book. I want you to know that it's a new story. I want you to know that it's a rich story. I want you to know that it's an engaging book. And it's a book that is easily accessible. It's not going to overwhelm you. It's about 300-ish pages in text, so not counting the notes and the bibliography and the index. And I think it's a pretty easy read. And to illustrate that it's an easy read, let me read a little of it. This is when Bobby is 22 years old. He is getting ready to travel across Europe and the Middle East on a trip that his father has sent him on so that he can learn more about the world. And he's traveling with a friend, and he stops in London before heading to the Middle East. So that's where we are. And here I go. I was very pleased to get your note about Bobby, Joe Kennedy wrote to Lord Beaverbrook, the British press baron, in March of 1948. He is just starting off and has the difficulty of trying to follow two brilliant brothers, Joe and Jack. That in itself is quite a handicap, and he is making a good battle against it. Bobby had stopped to see Beaverbrook, who had served in Parliament and was a Churchill confidant, on his way to the Middle East, from where he would write for the Boston Post about the fighting between Jews and Arabs in Palestine. After meeting Bobby, Beaverbrook wrote to Joe Kennedy that he was a remarkable boy. He is clever, has good character, energy, a clear understanding, and fine philosophy. You are sure to hear a great deal of him if you live long enough. At 22, and this is 1948, at 22, Bobby was coming into his own, ready to relay his thoughts about America's role in the world. As with Jack, his views emerged from the struggles of his youth. Born on November 20th, 1925 in Brookline, Massachusetts, Robert Francis Kennedy was a classic middle child, starved for attention as his father poured his hopes into Joe Jr. and Jack, Joe Jr. being the older brother who died at war in 1944. Joe Jr. and Jack and the family doted on the younger Ted. He often seemed every bit the runt that his father cruelly labeled him, especially when standing beside his taller, smoother, more handsome older brothers. In his youth, Jack dubbed him Black Robert, because struggling with his demons, he often looked dour, sad, and fearful. Though warm, gentle, and generous, he was also shy and awkward, and he often stood with his hands in his pockets and his head buried in his neck. I have a pretty good character on the whole, he wrote about himself at 13, but my temper is not too good. I am not jealous of anyone. I have a very loud voice and talk a lot, but sometimes my talk is not very interesting. Even as an adult, he never fully surmounted his insecurities. Words came out of his mouth, one of Jack's friends said of Bobby when the latter was 20, as if each one spoken depleted an already severely limited supply. Years later, when Bobby was an accomplished professional, his hands still trembled on occasion when he delivered an important speech, and he openly mocked his own efforts on the campaign trail. Sometimes, he told a friend in adulthood, I wish I never was born. To earn his siblings' notice to prove he was every bit as brave as them, Bobby pursued reckless challenges, starting at age 3, when he jumped into Nantucket Sound while sailing with his siblings, even though he didn't know how to swim, forcing Joe Jr. to rescue him. In a physical family with brothers who all performed feats of courage as well as children and adults, Bobby was perhaps the bravest of all. At Harvard, he earned his way onto his football team as a scrawny youth through sheer will, and he played on a broken leg against Yale to earn a coveted school letter. Through adulthood, he swam in swirling waters, skied steep slopes, and climbed dangerous mountains in a lifelong quest to prove himself. Overseas, he waded into hostile crowds against the advice of security details that couldn't guarantee his safety, and he was sometimes spat on and hit by eggs and tomatoes. He also inspected dangerous mines to survey working conditions. He lauded bravery, courage, and guts, and openly disparaged others for their cowardice. Not surprisingly, he brought passion to his early writings, and later a swashbuckling approach to the global challenges of Jack's presidency. So that'll give you a little bit of a flavor of how the book describes the boys as they're growing up and how their upbringing influenced the way they were in terms of looking at the world and thinking about the role that America should play in it. So I thank you for listening, and I hope you'll check out the book.